I want to start by saying I'm really at home in this family, and I want to find out with a raise of hands who has been to either the Atlanta Forum 2 years ago or DC last year, because then I'll know sort of the nature of the audience. Thank you. I'm going to repeat some of the things that we've talked about before, but I've got some new visions and new ventures to describe to you. And I truly am thankful to be in this forum. I think I'll say this right up front. If you're a cataract surgeon and you do 30 or 40 cases in a day, can you get to know those patients very well? No. Do you take their personal lives into attention? No. Very often you don't even see those patients very much after the surgery. If you're an ocular oncologist like the Hovlands and others that you've met over the years, you get intensively involved. If you're an oncologist caring for the lives of these people, not just the eyes, but the lives, you get really emotionally involved. And that's why I've really come to feel comfortable in this group, because you are led by a group of physicians that really cares for you. I think I said a few times before that I have really no scientific basis, and I always seem to follow some learned expert who comes up here and talks about the genetics of ocular melanoma. That's not me. My sum total of papers written in ophthalmic journals, 0, and so that's not my life. And I think the reason that I got involved in the Huntersville situation is that I've been doing sort of oculopolitics for the last years and trying to influence decision makers, focusing the research, or just being nice to patients. So I think that's been my pleasure. So let's get into Huntersville before this drags on too long. My preliminary drags on too long. Huntersville is a suburb of Charlotte. It's an affluent population, predominantly Caucasian, as opposed to central Charlotte. And in the early 2000s, 3 girls who attended the same high school over about a 7-year period, they weren't classmates, but they were there at the same time. 10 years later, 8 to 10 years later, no, less than that, 7 to 8 years later, developed uveal melanoma. One of them diagnosed at age 21. So this was really unusual. They weren't on the same track team. They didn't run around the track at the same time. They didn't have absolutely common interests, or they weren't neighbors, but they went to the same high school. The state of North Carolina's ophthalmologists didn't really realize this was going on because of the geopolitics of medicine, and my physician friends know this. Sometimes patients are referred because you don't want to, there's competition, that's the truth. And because uveal melanoma is so rare, most of these patients of our early set went to Wills Eye Hospital, globally recognized, certainly unquestionably preeminent ophthalmic oncologists, and then they went over to Jefferson Hospital and met Dr. Orloff, who many of you know, her mentor, Dr. Sato. And they were with you she was with you both the last 2 years. Marlena Orloff is the one who convinced me that I needed to stick with this, because I was very impressed with her devotion, her insight, and her energy, for sure. So that's sort of how I got interested, because they knew the families. The state of North Carolina did what they should and what they could, but they didn't do a very good job of communicating this to the patients, and they ultimately said, well, maybe it's ultraviolet. Young girls, ultraviolet. That's the connection, and that made the families feel terrible, of course. So the situation wasn't quite right. They concluded this isn't a cluster. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I don't know what a cluster is. I don't even want to. I know this is a unique population of young females. But because the state left it that way, there were unanswered questions with patients and families, and it was decided that because there's no excuse for this, I thought, that we better do something different. So our response was to develop a multidisciplinary physician consortium and I managed to even get Duke and UNC to talk to each other during basketball season. So the Duke and UNC doctors, ophthalmic oncologists, started sharing what they knew about these patients, and we got interactive with the support group in Huntersville, met patients, personally met the parents of the deceased girls. By the way, 2 of these 3 girls are deceased, and that happened pretty early, within 7 years or so. The state eye physicians and surgeons became much more interactive. We engaged with the state, tried to learn what the registry had done and what they had failed to do. We got involved with UNC School of Public Health to learn a little bit about the epidemiology of cancer in general and ocular melanoma. And we went finally to the state realizing that we couldn't do this alone and we had to have some funds. So this led to the development of a plan to reassess the population. Meanwhile, I started learning what the rest of the country and world was doing with regard to uveal melanoma, and I realized that there's an international society of ophthalmic oncologists, and I thought this is great because finally we'll collaborate in a wider sense. So we got closely involved with the patients, and the idea in this, I got to go back a little bit. The state did this first assessment, and they did a report, and the report led to an environmental engineer, coming to the high school where these girls were and doing an environmental survey phase 1. They did not sample soil, water, air. They just said, we've studied this, we've talked to the CDC, we've talked to SEER, we've talked to experts nationally and internationally. We don't know what to measure, where to measure, or what to measure. So case closed. And I think we decided that that wasn't really a good answer. So the professional partnerships included actually the media, because we realized that there was some misinformation spread and we needed the media to be our partner. Social media was, by the way, in identifying many more patients, and this population grew from 3 to 8 to more than a dozen. About this time, we decided that that state assessment wasn't quite solid enough. And because Marlena Orloff has an uncle who is a geospatial analyst, we did a little nepotism deal and got the county that had the money and the community that had the money to hire a geospatial analyst, and to also pay for genetic testing, because it was, I listened to my colleagues, the smart ones, and they said, you may not find soil to sample, but you better find out about the familial and the tumor tissue genetics. Last year we were with Rich Carvajal, and he was blended into the study to do tumor tissue analysis. Fortunately, a very reputable hospital in Charlotte did the genetic counseling complimentary. And we had a lot of face-to-face sessions with patients and families to keep them, this was for the patient and for the family. So this is just a quick picture of what geospatial analysis looks like. I'm not going to go into it. First of all, I'm not one of these scientists either. But we accumulate life story data, addresses for your residence, your occupation, your golf course, your pool hall, your gas station, places where you spent a lot of time, and we plot, the geospatial analyst plots it. The concentration shows by either diameter or by color the intensity of your activity, because not only do we have a spatial component, but we add the time element, and so you get a sort of a cube. You get a Rubik's Cube, really, because it's still the mystery, but you get a cube that relates the where with the how much time in each. So there's a relative weight to your occupational address, your residence address, et cetera. And then you do a geospatial analysis and look for the outcome. Is there some correlation? And I'll pretty quickly then, well, the population changed a little bit. It isn't just Huntersville High School for sure, or the Hopewell High School in Huntersville. It is a region with about a 15-mile radius centered on the community of Huntersville, but it now includes 24 patients. Not all of them wanted to be studied, so they were essentially dropped. So we were very inclusive in who we talked to. The epidemiologist said, no, they don't count. You got to go by the rules. So ultimately, we finally analyzed about 18 of the total patients that could have been in the plot. Quickly, the geospatial analysis, I can just say it did not uncover any known environmental or occupational or infectious toxin that would be related to uveal melanoma. And I'm looking at my experts in the back, and they won't counter that because in historic observations of other potential or real clusters, if you will, there has been no direct causative agent. On the genetic side, the BAP1 test was performed, all negative. Not all the patients chose to do it. Some were afraid of insurance issues, strangely, maybe not, but they weren't required. They loved the genetic counseling, the face-to-face work with a professional who listened to them carefully, personally, and the consents have been obtained for the tissue genome sequencing to be done at Columbia, and I hear that this is going to be an expanded influence in the future, and this is certainly rewarding. It's expensive, so the grant will have some funds left, and that'll go to trying to help Columbia advance this cause. I think this is the most important part of my talk, really. I do hope that there is more attention to registries. We found that nobody believed in this because they said the girls were in college in South Carolina. They don't count in North Carolina. You can't count them. And somebody lived 20 miles away, but he worked in Huntersville for 30 years, and they said, no, you can't count him. And I thought, well, the registry is faulty for a number of reasons, because epidemiologists get in the way, and number two, because there is some mismatch every once in a while. Who gets to record it? Is it the residents at diagnosis? Is it the residents of most life years? Is it the residents, is it the site of treatment, final diagnosis? Who knows? I do think in the same light that this episode will empower more research. On the fortunate side, one of our ophthalmologists is leaving UNC, but she's going to work for Quintiles, the outfit that looks at clinical trials and oversees the evaluation of clinical trials. So she'll be in a great position to maybe take the ideas of some of the wise minds in our profession to advance research into identification, cause, and cure. I do think we did dilated eye exams complementary in the community. We used the media to promote dilated eye exams, and made a big difference, especially for those who couldn't afford it, and community ophthalmologists helped. We dealt with the media sometimes dicey. I try to stay away from them now because I've been misquoted many times. I'm not an expert at talking to the media for sure, and I've become less expert, I think, in 2 years. I want to conclude, I guess, again with a comment about collaboration. I do hope the registries don't expand into there are a lot of registries, and if registries are competing, like Ocular Melanoma Foundations are competing, we're going to be in trouble because we don't have enough money to fund competition. There are good things about competition, I don't deny that, but when competition duplicates, overlaps, and double times, we're wasting valuable funds, valuable energy, and maybe patient lives. So I'm all for competitive advances in science, as long as we're not duplicating too much. I think the bottom line is I really want to let you know that our Huntersville population is very thankful to Cure OM, and we've enjoyed the relationships for sure, and it will definitely continue. I have a final conclusion. Now, some of you know this, some of you don't. There is another unique female population centered on Auburn University. These are girls predominantly girls, about 3 to 1 in the fraction, who attended Auburn University in the 1990s and have been diagnosed probably around age 40, way too early based on the curves that you've seen today, with uveal melanoma. They know each other through social media. The Alabama Eye Society, the State Eye Society, was about as blind as North Carolina was to this emerging issue. So Dr. Sato, Dr. Orloff, Mr. Castles, and I were in Auburn 2 months ago, And I hope we'll obtain a grant from the state to conduct a project similar to what we did in North Carolina. We might advance the cause in that. Now, what's the connection between Alabama and North Carolina? Well, we're both southeastern states. We have a raptor center in Huntersville, and there is an aviary right by the Auburn University football stadium because the war eagle is their mascot. So I got a well-developed manuscript from a lady who says this is the connection between, it's the raptor. So I don't know how raptors get into your bloodstream, but maybe we'll find out. So I don't mean to leave the discussion on a too light message, but I want you to know that your physicians are with you, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks.